Hello, welcome to our video on how to cross stitch for the Grand Prairie Public Library program. We'll be making this amazing little dinosaur, and you should have your kit with all of the supplies you need. There will be some variation in the way your fabric and your floss is there, but please note you have a needle in your Ada fabric. That's the fabric with the holes, and your extra skein of floss that is like an extra bonus amount of a certain color is to finish your piece at the end, so please keep track of that. Okay, so I washed mine and then I edged it in masking tape. You don't have to do either of those things. The masking tape will help protect the edges. Fold it in half and then into quarters so that you can mark where the center of your fabric is. I like to crease it pretty well so that it's easy for me to see it when I unfold where the center of my fabric is. And then we're just going to mark the center using the provided needle. The next step is to determine the center of the pattern. To do that, you just find the lines that are the center. They're usually marked with a bold arrow. Follow them to the middle. And then this one starts in what looks like his jaw. We're going to start with the color that we use the most closest to it. So we need to get our fabric into the hoop. Unscrew it to take it apart. Place the part without the metal screw on the bottom and the part with the metal screw on the top. Pop them together and then tighten the metal screw as tight as you can, and then pull the fabric so that it's taut. Okay, you do want to keep the fabric very taut. That's how you stop your cross stitch from getting all loose and wiggly, and also to make sure that you're not pulling your floss too tight as you attempt to overcompensate. Okay, so this is an important step, and you might need to retighten your fabric as you go along, and that's okay too. Just keep that nice and taut. Okay. So the thread is called floss in embroidery, and it comes in a grouping of 6 strands. For this project, we only need to be using 2 of those strands at a time. So you need to separate 2 strands, set the other 4 strands aside, and of course you'll have to separate those into groups of 2 strands as well when the time comes for you to use it. To do this, you need to untwist the floss. So make sure you have the right color. Make sure the symbol of the part you're stitching matches the symbol, which tells you which number floss to use. The floss is named by number, okay? I just marked where I want to start with a pen so that I know where to go, and then we're going to untwist this floss. So first we'll take off a section of it. We're not going to use the whole thing, especially not when you're just starting. That would be a lot of floss to manage, but take off a decent sized section of it and then cut that off. I used a very small section in this video. Normally I would use much more than that. And then you finish that back by popping it through the slit there to hold it in place. And then you just begin untwisting the floss. Very gently. So find 2 strands, separate them from the other 4 strands, and just begin untwisting the floss. When you have really long pieces, especially, it can take a little while, but it's kind of enjoyable just watching it come undone. And it comes undone quite easily. Sometimes you'll hit a snag and you'll have to work through it a little bit, but most of the time it's pretty easy to separate the floss. It is designed to do this. Sometimes you'll use pieces where you use 3 or even 4 strands, but when you're doing cross stitch, it's very rare to use the whole piece of thread. There we go. So I'm going to take the piece with 2 strands and I'm going to put it aside because I'm going to thread it onto my needle. And I'm going to take the hunk that still has 4 strands and I'm going to wrap it back around the floss bobbin so that it doesn't get tangled or lost or knotted, and it's easy for me to find when I'm ready for more of this floss, because I'm going to use a lot more of this floss. A lot. Probably going to use most of your floss for this. Okay, after you've got your 2 and your section of 4 put away, you have to thread your needle. You're going to have to do this a few times in the project, so try not to hate it too much. There's all sorts of tips and tricks online if you're really struggling. I struggled a little bit in the beginning because I was trying to do it looking through my phone camera instead of looking at the needle, and that sense of displacement was a bit off-putting. But in general, you should be able to get it through. If you need to give up and like lick the floss, I won't judge you too much. It's not super great for your needle, but it'll survive. Wow, I really struggled. I'm going to leave this here so that you can see that it is okay to struggle. You will get it in eventually, and that is fine. There we go. Okay, once you have it through, you need to pull it. You don't want the 2 ends to match. You want to have a nice tail. So one end or one side is significantly longer than the other, because you never want to be stitching with both sections, because then you'd be stitching with 4 and you only want to stitch with 2. Okay, so I can see where my middle was because the needle mark left kind of a wider hole. We're going to come up from the back through one of the holes in the fabric, and then we're going to, if we think of the holes as making a square, we're going to go up to the diagonal corner of the same square that we're in. There will be a close-up of this later, okay? Diagonally up. So we want all of our diagonals to go the same way. So this is from bottom to top going to the left. As we stitch more, they all need to face the same direction, okay? So we're going to leave a little tail of the floss, and then we're going to put the needle in so it can come out at the bottom of the next square, which is the top of the same square we're on. And then we're going to pull, and you can see here I'm pushing the tail that I left through the loop that I just made, okay? That's very, very important. So when I tighten it, the loop is going to tighten around the tail of the floss that I left and hold it in place, so you don't have to tie any ugly knots or any big things. You can use the thread to hold itself in place. And then as we keep stitching, we'll keep stitching around that tail to really just anchor it down and keep it flat against the fabric so it still looks nice from the back. So we have to count. There's lots of counting in this kind of cross stitch. How many of these stitches we need to make. So how many little blocks of color are there on there? And that's how many stitches we need to make going straight up. And it's good to double and triple check these numbers, because one little mistake here can lead to a much larger mistake down the road, because usually you use your first count especially as a reference point. So if this one was 15 stitches high and the next one was 16 stitches high, I might not count 16 next time. I might just go one past where I was, because that's easier, right? So you want to make sure, especially the ones that you count, are really solid, and then every once in a while you do need to double check and make sure that you're still on track for your count. And if you're not, you're gonna have to undo some of your work, which is really easy to do because we're not tying any knots or anything. It's just annoying. So okay, all my lines are going in the same direction, and I'm just filling little diagonal lines through these squares. And we're gonna do all the way up. Sorry, as I just kind of try and get a decent angle. All the way up into a beautiful line. And we're not going to worry about, it is called cross stitch, so eventually they will make X's. We're not going to worry about that quite yet. Okay, you can see I'm still trying to make sure the back is caught in by my floss. And it's good to check your back every few stitches, especially in the beginning. You want to make sure there's no knots or tangles back there. It will look gross. Your back's supposed to look just about as nice as your front. Okay, we're going to finish this floss now. So we've got all the stitches we need and we're running low on floss. So we're going to take the needle and gently slide it underneath 3 or 4 of the stitches that we just finished. You need to be careful that you're not going through the fabric and you can't see the needle on the other side. Once you're confident that your needle is in the right place and that you haven't gone through the actual fabric and just through the floss that you stitched, you can push the needle all the way through, pulling the floss gently with it. So you need to make sure that you leave enough floss at the end of your line to finish the stitch. And if I had enough to do multiple lines, I could do 10 lines before I did this again, and that would be fine. But you don't want to stitch right to the end and not have enough floss to finish your stitch. It gets awkward. We'll cut off the extras, being very, very careful not to cut any of our stitches, which would, of course, ruin everything. And that is how you're going to start and finish your threads throughout this entire piece. And you only have to finish a thread when you're running out of floss. Please don't do it every time you do a line. That's unnecessary. So I have a longer piece of floss now because it's easier for me to work with. And I'm going to do the exact same thing now, but I'm going to finish these X's in this line, okay? So we're going to start the floss the same way we started it before, by sewing over the tail, and we're just going to come down in the opposite direction. Now, as we go through this piece and we make more lines, it's very important that all the lines that are underneath diagonal in that way, and all the lines that are on top diagonal in the way that these ones are, that you want all the crosses to look the exact same. You start putting the one we're doing on top on the bottom and the one that's on the bottom on the top, you can actually see it in the piece and it doesn't look great. It removes from the kind of finished look. So usually it's best if you just pick a direction, and that's just the way you cross stitch forever. Just always go in the same direction, and that will help a lot of problems. This part is going to take a while. There's a lot of this dinosaur to stitch, and you don't want to stare at my camera the whole time. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few more stitches, and then I'm just going to kind of show you how I moved through the dinosaur and how I sectioned it off to make sense for myself. You don't have to do it that way, obviously, but if you are struggling or trying to figure out a good way to do it, then this is how I chose to do it. Just remember to keep your stitches going in the same direction and to check your work. So check the back and make sure it's tidy. And do not be afraid to unpick it if you need to clean it up. All you have to do is take the needle off of the floss, and you can use the tip of the needle to loosen your stitches and pull the fabric through and undo whatever it is that you have done. Sometimes you have to undo whole skeins of thread to get back to your mistake, but I promise it's worth it for the end product, okay? This is something that takes a long time to get good at, and you might find it frustrating and your thread is snagging a lot in the beginning. Just be patient, be careful, go talk to your guardians if you get stuck. If you get stuck and your guardians don't do this or don't know how to help you, feel free to send me an email here at work and I can walk you through it. We can go on a Zoom call and we'll figure it out and make sure that you have the help that you need, okay? You will have gotten my email in the kit, just in case you had any questions. Also my phone number. There you go, we're finishing this line up. And then we'll get to more exciting things. All right, there it is. One finished cross stitch line. If you get this far, you should be really proud of yourself because that is very beautiful and that is the start. It may just look like a line of stitches, but all this whole cross stitch is a bunch of lines of stitches. So, you know, once you've completed a line or a row, it's a good idea to mark it off on the pattern. This way, if you take a break from your piece and you come back to it, you know what you've already done without having to recount everything. So it's easier to pick up and keep going from where you left off. Okay, So once we've completed this line and we're all pleased with ourselves, we can keep going. I'm going to stitch to the right because it's a nice big chunk of the same color, and we're going to make sure we leave a hole where the nostril goes. We don't want to stitch there, that's going to be a different color, so we're just going to skip over it, move up a square with the stitches, nice and simple. Your back should be pretty close to as tidy as your front is. But all we did was we stitched all of that color to the right, and then I started doing a little bit more to the left. Please be careful around the bottom of the jaw. There's a different color of this greeny blue. It's very, very close, but it does have a different symbol on your key. So you need to make sure you're not stitching anything that's meant to be done in a different color. Only stitch what's meant to be done in this exact color, okay? So there you can see the whole head's now been done. You were able to see the different sections that I chose to work on. The back doesn't look as nice as the front. It doesn't have the pretty X's. It's got the lines through it, but it certainly doesn't look messy. There are some people who can make pictures on the back and in the front, but I'm not that good. So this is a nice close-up of the stitches, okay? All the diagonals on the bottom, even though I'm stitching down now, are still going in the same direction as the other bottom diagonals. And then the ones that go on top of that thread will all still be going in the same direction. Okay? Uniformity. That is key. And you can see the little squares and stuff in the fabric. This is a nice close-up. Okay? This is what you want your stitches to look like. Alright, so we have gone and done the other green now. Obviously the kind of stripes are pretty simple, but then we need to go and add it into the jaw and on the bottom of the arm. The arm especially looks pretty wonky without it. In this case, it's kind of going to be a diagonal line up instead of moving in straight little columns, but that's not a problem. We'll just follow the directions and stitch where our map tells us to stitch, making sure that we're stitching in the right direction so that all the bottom lines are facing the same way and all the top lines are facing the same direction. Okay? Once we've finished this section and we go in and make sure that the mouth, the jaw is good, I think I still have to do that on this one, then we can move on to the next colors. Be very careful when you're using this color floss that you don't mix it up with the other color floss. As you can see, they're very, very, very close. And in fact, when I started stitching, I couldn't even tell that they were different. It wasn't until there was a nice chunk of it in the stripe that I was able to visually see the difference in the colors of floss. But as you can see in this picture, it is different and it does make a difference. So it's very important that you use the floss, the correct floss, which is why we have everything labeled and numbered and on the bobbins, and we keep everything nice and organized, okay? Theoretically, you could probably do his spikes any color you wanted. If you had some purple floss, that might look fun, or some orange, but this shading in the jaw and on his arm would definitely need to be this color because it's kind of just like a shadow. So it's just a darker version of the same green. Okay. So once we're finished with his arm and we've finished with his jaw, we can pick our next color to use. I like to finish sections, so I'm going to do his eye. It's a nice big chunk of white, lots of straight lines, nice break from the kind of weird jaw arm stitching we just did. You're going to want to make sure that you leave gaps because, you know, there's going to be the black lines that go in there. So make sure that you skip those squares and you stitch all the white squares that need to be stitched. It's important that you stitch white. You can't just leave it blank, it looks bad. Okay, so even if it was the exact same color, you'd still have to stitch it. Now to the nose, which is tricky. It's just one stitch, but it's not too bad. So to start your floss, all you're going to do is you're going to, instead of leaving the tail to stitch over, because you're only doing the one stitch, you're going to start the tail by tucking it under the floss of the green, and you're going to finish it the same way. So you start and finish this one the way that you finished all the other ones, just by tucking it under your other colors of floss, okay? So there's a nice close-up of it right there, and that will just hold your floss down. It's going to stay in place, and it's going to continue to look nice. And I can see my dogs fur on that, and I'm very sorry. Okay, then we're going to finish the rest of the black. So we'll do the eye and the top hat. Then we add his cup with the little bits of steam, and that is that, plus the words T-Rex, obviously, at the bottom. So now that's your whole cross stitch. If you need to take a break or whatever, obviously you should. I imagine it's taken you a couple of days at least to do this. Then you're going to remove the masking tape if you added any. If not, no worries, you don't have to do this step, but you do still need to wash it before we finish it, okay? Washing is really important because you've had your hand oils on it and it gets kind of gross, so you want to clean it up. Use a couple drops of dish soap or another very mild detergent, okay? Fill the sink up with warm water, not too hot. The floss that you have is color fast, so it shouldn't bleed on anything, but you still just don't want to use hot water. Let it soak for about 15 minutes. Okay, and then we're going to come back and we're going to rinse it off. So we'll drain out this soapy water and we'll use cold water to rinse the fabric off. And to make sure that there's no soap remaining on our beautiful masterpiece. And we're going to want to rinse it a couple of times because we can't scrub it and we're not wringing it, we're being very gentle, so we just have to do it a lot instead. Okay, so if you hadn't stitched tightly, you might notice your stitches are coming loose, but I'm sure that you all did an excellent job and that everything is staying where it belongs. So we'll just run some cold water directly over it to do a final rinse, and then we'll let it dry. Okay, so to dry it, you need 2 clean dish towels. You're going to put the piece on top of 1 clean dish towel and then layer the second dish towel over top of that and gently roll it up and squeeze it. We don't want to twist it or wring it out. Just want to let it kind of squeeze it and then sit it down, air dry it for probably overnight. And then you're going to iron it, and you're going to iron it by keeping a dish towel between the fabric and the iron. The iron should never touch the floss. Okay? After that's been finished, we can start to prepare the backing. So you want the back part of the hoop, and you're going to trace around the outside. Use a marker or a pencil or a pen, it doesn't really matter. Get a nice circle, exactly that size, and then we're going to cut that out, and we need to cut it out at exactly that size, so we don't want it to be any bigger than that. Don't cut out outside of the circle, don't leave a gap, cut out exactly that size of circle, because this is the back of the hoop, and if it's too big it will be bunchy and gathery, and if it's too small it just won't fit. So I want to make sure that we're pretty precise here, and then we will take our ironed and dried and cleaned fabric, center it in the hoop. Make sure it's exactly where you want it to be, because once the step is done, it is never coming out of that hoop again. I mean, I guess you could theoretically do it, but it'd be a lot of work. It's going to be sewn directly into place, okay? So I'm good with that. I'm just going to tighten that. And you're going to tighten it really, really well and make the fabric nice and taut again. Even though we're not stitching, this is just as important because this is going to be what's holding it in place for theoretically forever, okay? So tighten it really, really well, and then take your scissors and cut off the extra fabric. So you only need like an inch or so, 1.5 inches maybe, probably closer to an inch, of extra Aida around the edges. And then we're going to gather that all in by doing a really loose running stitch. So all you do is take the floss. I'm using the extra 4 strands from the steam over the mug, okay? So I split that up into groups of 2 strands. I didn't even really use all of the 2 strands because there's really not that many stitches in this color. So take the extra 4. That way you've got a color that is really close to your fabric, so it's not going to show through because that's going to be around the back. And do loose, long stitches evenly around the edge of the fabric. You don't want it to be at the very edge because you don't want it to rip through, but you don't want it to be too close to the hoop either, okay? Leave a nice long tail and you have a bunch at the end, and you can pull it tight so it will just floop all the fabric inside really nicely, and then tie a tight, strong knot. This is going to be hidden, so you don't have to worry about it being seen, to hold all the fabric in place, okay? So now we've got the Ada and the T-Rex in the hoop. That's all done, but we still need to cover this back because it doesn't look particularly nice. And that's where the felt comes in, okay? If you need to, you can stitch some extra crisscrosses across the back to hold it in place, but you should be okay with just doing the running stitch. Alright, so if you have to do the crisscrosses, you do them before this step. Now, this is the only time where you really need to use the full piece of floss. I didn't bother separating this. I don't think it would be the end of the world if you did, but you can just go ahead and use all 6 strands at once here and tie a decent sized knot at the very, very end of a long piece of this floss. Now, this is that extra skein of thread. So for me, it was orange. Some of you've got the taupe or the gray or whatever. It doesn't matter what color this is. All of the colors that you guys have are ones that will look good on this piece, okay? So you take your floss and you tie the knot in it. And we were able to tie the knot because the knot's going to be hidden by all of that fabric. We're not going to see it at all. So you want your needle to come out right next to the hoop. So right against the wood. And you pull and you pull and you pull till it all goes through. Sorry, I had extra floss sitting around. That's why you see that extra orange. And you pull all the way through. Okay? And then the knot is hidden. And then you take the needle and you go through both the felt and the Ada fabric, and again pull it out right next to the hoop, so you should have a nice little line stitch, okay? Now we're going to start doing what is called a blanket stitch. And there's lots of tutorials if you need to Google that online. But it's really simple. It might look complicated, but it's really simple, okay? So all we're going to do is we're going to do the same kind of idea where we put the needle through the felt and the Ada, bringing it out right next to the hoop. And then we're going to take the floss and loop it around the needle. So the needle is going through that loop that we just made. And then we just pull it tight, okay? And then it will catch on itself and it will create this really nice frame around our felt. And so all the stitches will look like they're connected to each other with this line. I'll show you a close-up in a moment, but you just keep doing the same thing all the way around. So you push it through right next to the hoop, you loop the floss around the needle, and you pull it tight, okay? You ideally will try to make all your stitches about the same length and about the same distance apart. Uniformity always looks nicest, but it's not an exact science, and it's not the end of the world if they're not, okay? But just keep doing that until you've gone all the way around your whole hoop. And this will take you a few minutes, okay? And then I'll show you how to finish it. There's a closer up. You can see the line, if you see what I mean about how it should all kind of be like there's a line connecting them. Those aren't the most even stitches I've ever done, but there we go. That's all the way around. So your last one, you're going to do the same thing you've been doing all the way around the hoop, but you're going to do it on top of that stitch that you did to start it, so that the line connecting your stitches goes all the way around, so they can't tell where you started and where you stopped. And then, just to keep things really simple, I'm going to let you guys cheat and just tie a really simple knot, just a really small knot, really tight one right there. Do a double knot so it stays firm, but don't let it get too big. And then clip the tail of your floss so it's right next to the knot so no one will be able to notice it. And that's it. Congratulations, you have completed and framed a cross stitch, which is something you should be proud of. Okay, if you guys have any questions or concerns, of course, please shoot me an email and we'll talk to you later.